Thanks for
Hi,
coming today, everyone.
hi, Karen.
Hi, Ro, and
Sorry.
Molly and Hunter. I think Mark even came last week. Oh, he's a regular now. We'll have
Hi,
to give him a
Karen.
Always got a
membership.
nice smiling face, Karen.
Oh, nothing to not smile about, I guess.
Always uplifting.
Oh, thank you. Got to stay positive because we're about to change the world. Well, just like to welcome everyone, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Bunurong Boon Wurrung and the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and I pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging. My name's Karen Kim, and I'm a Senate candidate for this current federal election, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of my fellow party candidates here today to our second People's Forum with a focus on business, education, training and jobs. Just like in the first days of democracy in Athenian times, we have invited you today so we can showcase one of the measures we are proposing to effectively represent your concerns, your issues and your suggestions for improvements in our society. We're also developing an app so you wouldn't even have to wait for the monthly forums that we're proposing. At the moment weekly, of course. With technology these days, there's no excuse as to why Australians shouldn't be able to have an effective conduit directly to government. So our People's Forum today is for you to find out a little bit about us, the candidates who hope to represent you, and please see it as an opportunity for you to share with everyone here what matters to you. In a moment, we'll meet some of the team and then we'll open up the floor to your suggestions and your say. And feel free to put your questions in the chat anytime during the session. Now I'd like to pass you on to my fellow Senate candidate, Cheryl Lacey.
Thanks very much for that, Karen. And welcome, everybody. It's great to have you here. As Karen said, I'm one of the Senate candidates, and my interest and dedication over many years has been particularly in education and Australian families. Now, when we talk about education, it's quite interesting. People often think about classrooms and primary and secondary school, but education, actually, we know is lifelong. And importantly, there's three key elements to education in Australia, particularly for us for this election. First one being what our role and responsibility is as an Australian citizen. So knowing how to vote, knowing what the responsibilities of Parliament parliamentarians and elected representatives are once they have been elected. And that is an education element that's been missing here in Australia for many years. So that's one of our really important platforms, that we do inform and ensure as many people as possible know and understand what Parliament really is all about. The other one, of course, is school education, early childhood, secondary, tertiary education, and its influence on the Australian family, future work, and future possible, better living standards and lifestyle. And the third one, which isn't often talked about, is the impact of education across other portfolios and vice versa. Those sorts of issues might come up today. If not, throughout the course of the campaign, we'll be talking about and writing about those issues. So once again, welcome, and look forward to hearing your feedback and concerns. Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl. And now we'll hear from Mark O'Connell.
Hello, I'm unmuted. Thanks, Cheryl. I guess my perspectives on education and training come from a business background, both in small, medium and large-sized businesses. And I think the people that I speak to and the people I'm dealing with are particularly concerned on a number of levels. I guess the first level that I've experienced myself and the people I talk to is the quality of vocational training and TAFE and RDOs. What we're finding is that the quality of the training has really been let go. And even within the TAFE system, which has substantially been defunded over the years, is really not putting out the quality of people that we need to be trained and to be ready for purpose. The other part is probably that everyone has experienced is availability of staff. Now that sort of goes into immigration debates and all sorts of things at the moment and COVID. But just the simple availability of qualified staff, not just for hospitality, but there's a shortage of staff right across the board. And that is a challenging part of what small and medium and large size business are finding at the moment. In addition to that, I guess we then look at the quality of the higher education that's being provided for professionals in this country and how that rates against other countries around the world. And I guess what we're finding is there's a great disparity. I'm even finding with my own children that one attended Monash and attended about 12 months of the last 2 years, and one attended Melbourne and only basically hasn't attended any live classes at Melbourne University, for instance. So there's a great disparity that has come out of COVID and the pandemic and lockdowns. So there's a whole range of issues there. But I think overall, people in business looking at education and training, they're just looking for policy signals. They're just looking for some certainty from government in terms of leading in these areas. That's all from me.
Thanks, Mark. And we'll pass on now to Nirja. Nirja, welcome.
Thanks very much, everyone. And this is a really poignant topic. When it comes to education in Australia, and I'll give you, leading from what Mark said, my son is doing his PhD at ETH in Zurich in Switzerland, and he did his actuarial science at ANU in Canberra. And he says that it was cakewalk. So our level versus the international level has been declining over the years, which the causes can be plenty. One is the focus that our government puts on attracting talent to teach and not allowing the brain drain to happen. The second is our bureaucracy. When I was working for Department of Education, New South Wales, and Mark Scott was heading, he was the secretary, and TAFE was within his domain. And except for having a news every week or every month, something that the journalists could come and say, oh, how great we are, there was no real commitment to change, to fix the broken system, to even have the right KPIs. Our KPI was, we've got this program, $360 million to be spent in 2 years. And my question to them was, but will it lead to jobs? Will it lead to skills that are competitive? Will it lead to even completion of the certification? There was no ambition to do the right things, which is that the right people enter the program. The program is, they have the intent to complete it. And if they don't complete it, we do a full, understanding of why this has not happened, and then will it lead to jobs? So we have not connected the dots. It is so simple. The talent in Australia is still in plenty. We have just not leveraged it. So there's much to do, and this will happen only when we involve the grassroots and we have every single citizen be their best, learn from the best, capitalize on their skills and talents and leadership.
Thanks very much, Nirja. Sorry, I haven't really introduced everyone's bios, but if you're interested in linking with us on LinkedIn, you can certainly see the background of all the candidates here today. We all have a very diverse background. We're very passionate and we're real people, and that's what we're really advocating, that the government really needs to have more diversity and more people at the grassroots who really know what it's like to to work and to suffer in business, to work in health and education, and we want to bring all this diversity into the government, which it really just doesn't have at the moment. I'd just like to now introduce Peter. We'll go to Peter Maliaros, candidate for Laylaw.
Hi all, and thank you to my colleagues for some great introductions and discussion about a really important topic, education, and how that leads to every facet in life. My background has been business for the last 30 years, the last 14 also having a focus on community. And as part of that, also conducting research into the causes of inequality, poverty, and the ills that these situations cause throughout society. My research has shown that education is pivotal to help overcome the challenges we're currently facing, but also into the future as automation takes up more and more of the roles that are currently there. That's actually one of the key leverage points to overcome some of the unemployment that will occur as a result of automation and job losses in that space. My other focus, I'm in, as Karen mentioned, the candidate for Laylaw. Now, Laylaw is a really interesting electorate in that it's almost a mini Australia with the amount of diversity in terms of cultures that exist there. It's also one of the fastest growing corridors in Australia, which is partly the reason why we have one of the highest rates of unemployment. We're currently at around, last report I saw was about 8.3% compared to the Australian average of 6.9%. So the bottom line is that we do have some unique challenges here in Laylaw. My plan for Laylaw is to pilot a program where everyone who's unemployed will be funded and employed with appropriate community bodies that are filling gaps in the area. As an example, there's something like 1.4 million trees that need to be planted in the region. But at the moment, the funding and the support for that project is well below par, and they will miss that target by a long shot. So, there's a simple fix right there where we can employ people who are looking for jobs whilst they're looking for jobs to help meet a really important target to help with global warming and all the other issues that come along with that. So my focus, as I said, is business and jobs specifically, and I look forward to a robust discussion amongst the community members around their thoughts in this space. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. And finally, in our team today, we have Vern Hughes, who's also a federal Senate candidate. Vern? Oh, you'll have to unmute.
Be a good idea. Hello, everyone. This is such an important topic, isn't it? And it's so important that we have a really good, wide-ranging discussion about all aspects of education and training. And the striking thing about the political scene is that we don't have serious discussion about things. The political discussion is abysmal. It usually boils down to Labor and Liberal plucking figures out of the air and saying, we'll spend an extra 1.5 billion on this, and we'll spend another $500 million on apprenticeships. They're figures plucked out of the air. They actually make no difference to the sum total of problems that need to be addressed in the system. And yet that's what we get every election. It's the same every time. It doesn't matter whether Labor or Liberal is in government. They do not engage the community as a whole in thinking about core questions about how we design a good education system that not only
Thank you so much, Vern, and that's a great segue into our opening of the floor to people who would like to start a conversation, whether it's in business, education, training, or jobs, which are our focus today, or anything else that's on your mind. Perhaps if you want to just call out, or I'm going to call you. Keppel, do you have a question or something
Hello.
to say?
Hi, Karen. Thank you, and thanks everybody. I'm glad to be here and appreciating listening to your thoughts and what you're putting forward collectively. I read a little bit prior to this, particularly Vern, some of your writings on the Sensible Centre site and on mutualism and distributism, and I think there's a real potential there for getting past some of the binary kind of left-right sort of culture wars that have gone on over the last 20 or 30 years, and just, you know, and particularly around the sort of common ground that both left and right seem to have of centralising everything, bureaucratizing everything. And I'd be really interested to hear a little bit more about, perhaps from Vern or any of you, about how you see that different approach kind of working, particularly, I suppose, from some of the ideas that Vern you put forward about funding for schools and kind of moving towards more parent-run schools or community-run schools. And my background, I should say, is as a child, I went to a community parent-run school, and very innovative. Some things were a little bit screwy, but it was the 70s. So, but I do really like that model of actually giving the power back to communities, small groups, not to businesses to try and make a massive profit out of education. I think that's the wrong way to go, but to actually resource people to be more proactive in creating solutions themselves. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how that might sort of influence your policies.
Perhaps Vern, if you'd like to start, and then perhaps Cheryl would like to say a few things.
Wow, Capel, that's great. I mean, I could talk all day about the issues that you've just raised there. But you know, part of the trick in what we're trying to do is learn how to articulate complex things in a simple way, and that's not easy. And it's part of the reason why the major parties keep perpetuating simplistic answers to complex things, because they don't know how to address it in more wide-ranging terms either. So they end up just throwing cliches around. We'll spend an extra $2 billion on aged care. Don't ask us how we'll spend it. It'll go somewhere. We just hope it gets to the right people. So it's hard to do. But to start with, you're right. We've had a century of centralization of authority and power in both public and private sectors. That's the century that we've come from. And that meant that when governments thought about schools, they thought, yep, of course it makes sense to have big bureaucratic education departments that can roll out programs and do things in bulk. And that's the natural way that they thought about it. We know that actually that doesn't work very well, because the thing about children and students is everyone is different. Everyone learns differently. Everyone has different ways of learning new things. Some people can do that in a classroom, but a big chunk of kids can't do it in a classroom. They're better off doing it with their hands, outdoors, or in a workshop. That's how they learn, but we don't cater for them. We put them all in schools, classrooms, and do a one-size-fits-all thing. It doesn't work for all kids, and so we know that. And so governments have, they do their best to try and tinker at the edges with how they might be able to tailor learning for a whole range of students and meet the needs of a whole range of parents whose aspirations are also widely different as to what they want for their kids. So part of our response to all of that is to say, as a first step, stop the centralization of authority and control. Actually, let's start sending power and authority downwards and outwards to families, to parents, to communities, so that as much of the decision-making as possible can be done at the lowest level. In schools, that means having more autonomy for schools to do things differently, allowing schools to offer different approaches to learning, allowing schools to be run by different kinds of people, allowing NGOs and co-ops of parents to run schools if they want to and seriously want to make that work in their community. These things are done in other countries, and we in Australia have been pretty slow to take them up, but you can easily decentralize as easily as centralize. It's just a political choice. If you want to decentralize power and authority to people on the ground, we can. Examples all over the world of where this is being done successfully. Our politicians don't think that way. So in a sense, before we can even have the debate about how we do that, we've got to get some different people elected so that we have some different voices there to start this very conversation. So much more to say on this, but Cheryl, you can add something.
Well, Vern, first of all, I commend you, because I could listen to you for ages on that. I know it's an interest that we all have, education, and clearly all of these other topics today. What's really interesting is that we continue to tap into these similar conversations, and we need to really get back to the core of the main issue, and that is that, in a nutshell, school education has actually been hijacked in this country. Now, what do I mean by that? When school education first began here, without getting into a history lesson, we had parents responsible for their children's education. And schools began in community buildings where there was education Monday through Friday. And then over the weekend on Saturday and Sunday, it was faith-based, use of that structure. Over a period of time, as our communities built and started to grow, the various faiths couldn't all afford their own buildings. So one solution was government support. And that's where that hijacking has come in. What's happened is governments have taken greater responsibility and control, and parents have in some ways relinquished their responsibility. So we can't say it's all government's fault. We can't say it's all about government. Parents have also got to step up to the mark here and realise that they are responsible for their children's education. Therefore, their rights are front and centre. And that's something that we need to be able to support them to understand and be better educated themselves on that. Now, what's really interesting, I'm also very big on language. And, I have got report cards, for example, where I was a pupil at one stage. Now I'm a student. A lot of the language now in policy is around the child and children. So we have to remember that there are subtle differences in these, but also very important. Every time we talk about the child, we're actually talking about a parent's child. Now, when they're at school, they're a student. So there's got to be different rules that come into play as to the amount of authority and control school systems and government have over a child versus the support they provide them as students. And I'll come back to pupil. Going back to, if you're interested in the English language and how it's unfolded, pupils were orphans. So there was financial support for children who didn't have parents to provide financial support for schooling for them. So all of these things matter in terms of the history of where we began and where we've headed to and what we've become today. Now, the other element there is, of course, that one of the big problems we've got because of this is that education, schools and students are not mentioned in any of the constitutions, not the Australian Constitution nor any of the state and territory ones. So therefore, we've got a real problem with who's in charge. So the conflict between the Commonwealth and the state comes into being here. So again, it's a bit like everything else. We need to fully understand and appreciate that there are complexities at play that we're not putting on the table to discuss effectively. We're still looking at these band-aid issues around class sizes, around, the type of curriculum that we need. If I hear curriculum reform one more time, I'll scream. I mean, there are much more important issues at play that need to be addressed, these fundamentals, in order for us to get our Australian curriculum right. And one of those things is also what Vern was saying, and that is around this bottom-up, community-focused element around education. And Keppel, you mentioned that you went to a community school as a student. Now, that's exactly how schools operated and functioned. And the value of school education actually came from the notion that parents did have to make a payment way back. And over time that is reduced and payments aren't required. Parents can freely send their children to school without paying a cent. We know it costs a lot of money generally, but parents essentially don't have to contribute. Whereas 100 years ago, they did, because it was so valued. The other thing I will quickly say on this, though, is that if we're going to have this bottom-up approach, it needs to be balanced with some sort of top-down agreement on what we mean by a fundamental education that's required to be available for all. And that's the equality component that's missing. So if we have that national agreement on an Australian curriculum for fundamental subjects, then we have greater opportunity for the autonomy from that bottom-up community-based approach. That's the first thing. And the last thing I'll finish off with that is the funding approach. if we had the funding currently being applied to the student directly, and the parent being in a position to be able to determine where that funding goes, we would be a lot better off. Gonski has just admitted after a decade that he made a mistake by sending all the money direct to the states. He most certainly did. And if you take a look at the Victorian Education Department's website, you will see that a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old is receiving different funding, or the school on their behalf is receiving different funding. Now, how is that so when we have a standard agreement on the value of every child? Because the state is controlling the money, Commonwealth's sending it through to the states doing as they please. That's the beginning of a conversation like, Vern, I could have all day. But I hope that gives you a little bit of history as to how we've got to where we are today, and the importance of us all understanding the Judeo-Christian foundations that we began with as a nation, and the opportunity for religious freedom by offering what was intended to be an effective public education system so no child missed out. And that's what we've lost. And that's what I think our party collectively can start to put back on the table. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Cheryl.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Hunter, would you like to share your perspective from a student's perspective, just like what you shared briefly in the chat, if you're available to talk? No, maybe not. Hunter? Otherwise, would anyone like to comment on business or training?
If I could just jump in there for 2 seconds. I just wanted to thank Vern and Cheryl on their comments, but also Hunter, commend him and your brother for becoming a teacher in order to help fix the situation. So congratulations. Look, I totally concur with, especially the comments Cheryl made with regards to the system not being fit for purpose. Look, let's put it. Let's make this really clear. It really goes back to the Federation document, the Constitution. It was never intended to have as wide a scope as it's been made to. It just does. It isn't. It's almost like, well, it is. It's an agreement. In a nutshell, it's an agreement between the states and the Commonwealth. Nothing more. With the addition of when we have to vote, as in, the electorate has to vote every 3 years, and the rules around that. Essentially, that's what that document is about. That's what it covers. That's what it encompasses. The problem with that, of course, is we've had to stretch it in every which way to try and incorporate and include every other thing that is part of society. But the biggest thing that's missing is a Bill of Rights, which is one of the things that we're really big on introducing, assuming we get your vote at the election. And I'm hoping that the Bill of Rights plus some other constitution, even documents, even including the human rights charters as part of that, would go a long way towards filling the gaps that are still there 100 years later, or 100 and whatever years later. Definitely, it would definitely move us in the right direction of addressing a lot of the issues that are currently in existence.
May I just, Karen, sorry, may I just comment there on something that Peter said there regarding human rights and so forth? Just something else that I'm involved in, and very proudly, is the Rotary Club of Melbourne. I've been a member there for coming up 20 years, I think it's that long. So it's 17 years thereabouts. And it's a remarkable organisation, and it really does reflect the value and purpose of community working together to grow and to flourish, through various vocational contributions and so forth. But the reason why I'm raising this is because during the Second World War and towards the end of the Second World War, UNESCO was established, and it was established by the coming together of ministers of education around the world. And it was the Rotary Club of London that actually made this happen. So Rotary was central to UNESCO being formed to ensure that around the world that basic education and literacy that we've heard about for decades actually occurred, and that was all around the construction of world peace. What's happened is that we've moved from that to all of this woke nonsense, and the human rights movement has totally gone off the charts, as we know. So again, we need to come back to the history and the value of why we had that organisation in the first place, and come back to the core values that were intended so that we would have a free and prosperous world where all children would have the right to that basic education. So there's lots at play, and I think that's what I'm really trying to say. Once again, we can, we've got to really dig deep through these layers to identify where the core fundamental changes are required in order to build back up again effectively. We can't build a house without a strong foundation. We've lost our strong foundation of education in some ways. It's a little cracked. We can rebuild that. And I think that's what we need to do.
Can I just comment on that, Cheryl? And I think also Peter had touched on it as well as Vern. I think, for the average person in the street, it's not so much the academic debate. It's actually, for the average person in the street and the average person in business, it's more of a case of what is this state federal system and how is it getting in the way of actually delivering what we expect it to deliver. And I guess you're all saying that in more or less different ways, but essentially for the person in the street, that's what it's about is, why is the federal government handing over money to the states, and why is the states then having their own way of spending that? Is there not some basis upon which the obligations of the governing government, is there not some obligations on who actually is going to take bottom line responsibility for this? So yes, it goes back to parents. Yes, it goes back to community. But at the end of the day, the funding's coming centrally. It's being dispersed, and then it's getting lost, down rabbit holes. So I suppose that's one thing. Now, whether you're talking about health, whether you're talking about education, whether you're talking about vocational training, whether you're talking about higher education, the same issue applies. We have this I suppose, conflict between where the money's coming from and at what level the policy is being applied. So I think for most people, they're looking for some rationalisation of that, I guess, because we're not interested in the argument so much. We're more interested in what the outcome is.
Hunter just actually posted something. Hunter, thanks very much for putting that in the chat there. I couldn't agree with you more around having an Australian approach to education. So I talk about a national system. And if we had that nationalist system, the ultimate value would be that we could construct an independent board of education, and that would remove the politics from education and put it in the hands of an independent body that would be able to manage this so much better and really deal with the issues. And you're right, Mark, it is so complex. We need to make it as simple as possible for the average person. I shouldn't say average person, but for everyone to be able to understand. If education is there for all, the simplistic understanding of how it operates and functions should be available to us all. And that's certainly what's missing. And I've probably added to that too with the way I spoke. But a national education system headed by an independent board would be a brilliant way forward. And
agreed, 100%. And it would save at least tens of billions of dollars.
Are you referring to that, Cheryl, in relation to both preschool, primary, secondary, tertiary? Are you referring to it across the board?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because then you get buy-in at the community level, the regional level, pushing states out of it, which I absolutely advocate, to get this bottom up that Vern spoke about and that you mentioned, Mark, particularly with business also requiring, you know, the right talent and the right training and development to come on board. But also that certainly needs to be balanced with the prevention of corporations coming in and stepping up and taking over. So, you know, it does require some work, but essentially an independent board of education would definitely remove so much, as Nisha said, cost, spending, not investment, and this merry-go-round that we're constantly on.
Yes, correct. Hunter, I think Hunter said politics should not be part of education. I think that's exactly what you're saying.
Thanks, Hunter. Thank you. Does anyone have anything to say about training and jobs? Because I think, Peter, you started to talk about the training opportunities for homeless people that you work with. Would anyone like to make comment? I do have a little anecdote. Just recently, I was speaking with a business in Melbourne CBD, and she was saying that, you know, like a lot of restaurants, it's just very, very difficult to get staff at the moment, whether it's because of the contact tracing, which we know has now been abolished since last weekend, but also because the borders are still just starting to open up, and the backpackers and the visitors who come for their short-term stays and working visas, where a lot of the hospitality actually get their staffing from. I mean, this has really impacted businesses so much that some businesses are even shutting temporarily, because even though the customers are knocking at the door, they can't cater for them. And then on top of that, in reference to our bottom-up approach, there's a lack of that showing in the business sector, because the vouchers that they were giving out recently from the government to stimulate the CBD have just been a nightmare for restaurants, because there's more people than ever knocking at their doors and they just cannot cater for them. So this is just a ridiculous example of the lack of communication and really care for wanting to know what the issues are for businesses. They don't talk to them. And they're saying if they had have just asked us what we need for stimulation, for a helping hand after COVID, this would not have been it.
I think that's I think that's a really good point that you make, and I think as a business owner, and also a person who deals with a lot of other business people, I think part of the problem is, particularly in small business, is that, you know, we've got a huge upheaval happening in aged care at the moment. We've got big challenges in preschool. We've got big challenges in hospitality and travel. With regards, now, all of these people earn that $22 an hour or thereabouts, and they all go and get a Cert 3, and they move between these sectors. So if aged care is a place where they no longer are feeling fulfilled, you know, they're moving between, because that's the group of people we're talking about, and there's a shortage in all areas of those people. And these upheavals that are happening in aged care and NDIS are actually taking people out of the TAFE system who, once again, probably aren't being trained as well as they need to be, but they're swapping between jobs because of various upheavals that are occurring at the moment, and there's a shortage overall for all of those sectors.
Can I just add 2 more points there too, Karen and Mark, to what was just expressed there? And this comes back to what I mentioned earlier on regarding education flowing through other portfolios and other portfolios impacting education. So in the CBD, we know we've got all of this construction taking place. Now, international students can purchase their own properties now, and they can also have family members, their adult parents or family members, coming in on a visa through their student visa, and the parents can purchase real estate so that the whole family gets to live here based on that international student's position. Now, what that does is boosts the economy in terms of building and construction. It certainly boosts the state coffers when it comes to stamp duty. But what it's doing is it's watering down our education standards, very much so. And it's also causing issues around housing affordability, particularly first home buyers. So here's an issue where we've got some industries such as building and construction benefiting through the education model that's been sitting there for some time, but it's disadvantaging Australians. Second thing is the other point to this with business, and back to your point, Karen, around the vouchers and so forth, and to try and boost hospitality. Lygon Street is a good example where a lot of businesses have closed down. Now, the reason why they closed down is partly because of COVID, as we know, but also because a lot of them were paying cash to these international students and backpackers. So when the JobKeeper funding came in from the Commonwealth, they didn't have sufficient need on their books to justify being able to get that benefit. So again, our international students and backpackers are in a position where we're compromising even our businesses here in the country. So we have to, I'm not saying we don't have international students, don't get me wrong at all, but we need to look at the impact of that. And if we're going to invest in this, the investment needs to be made because our education system is world class, not because it feeds other sectors at the expense of Australians.
I think the other thing I'd like to just, sorry, jump in just quickly.
A couple of points there. Look, it's very clear, isn't it, that once you start to unpack one area like education and training, we quickly discover that everything is connected. So the intersection with immigration, it's a very strong one here in all sorts of ways. The connection with industrial relations is a very strong one. So just to throw in an anecdote that illustrates both of these things, my ex is a school teacher in a Catholic secondary school. That school for the last 10 years has had a policy of only employing teachers from the UK and Ireland. It hasn't employed an Australian teacher for at least a decade. Why do they do that? The principal argues they're better trained than Australian teachers, and when they come here, they may have 25 years of experience, but I pay them at a year one level, so they're cheaper. Now, there are many employees and many employers in all sorts of areas who have similar practices. And it's as though governments are oblivious to what actually happens in the real world. Whether it's a good or bad thing that school principal does that, it's what they do. But you will never hear a government refer to this as potentially, problematic. It's quite problematic in many areas. And the preference of many employers, I think, for overseas hiring of people is a very major trend. It's driven by many things. But it's, again, never discussed. And so many of these areas where you've got an intersection between a number of complex things, they require a lot of holistic thinking about working your way through these, finding sort of holistic solutions. And time again, you discover that the people who make up our governments, our parliaments, are really just not up to getting their heads around the complexity of these sorts of questions. And, I know I've said that before, but as we dig deeper, into these problems, we just come up against it time and time again. We find there's more complexity than we even thought initially. And when we find that complexity, we think, okay, who's going to pioneer a way forward in this area whereby we can make progress? And the answer is no one in our parliaments is doing it. So it's up to us to sort of take that lead. And I guess that's why we're here. But, you know, and sometimes when you think, oh, this is a hard road we're on, you only need to listen to the politicians talk about something like education or training for 2 minutes to realize, yes, they're not up to the job. And this is why we're on that road. So
thank you, Vern. Just before I pass on to Peter, I'd just like to reiterate that point that in hospitality as well, the people I speak with do say that even the ones that are trained here, even if they do have their certification, it takes them a year or so to be as good as the backpackers that come with their training from Europe. And that's why they're opting for the overseas trained hospitality staff. Hours plus hours asked for almost double the rate at the moment. They're advertising themselves on socials for the hospitality people, but they're advertising $35, $40 an hour, and these are for young people that have had little or no experience. It's just a crazy market out there now. Sorry, Peter.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Vern. And look, I just want to just add my thoughts to what is being said. One of the issues that these politicians seem to have is, well, not seem to have, they do have, is that they don't want to listen. And the reason they don't want to listen is because they really don't have any innovative or real answers. And the problem all stems from, you look at any of the issues, even the issue that Vern was talking about with regards to the Catholic school, it all comes back to the marketplace and the emergence, just the natural emergence of what occurs in a market system. And the problem is that, they'll argue that we could, they'll make it either, well, you either allow that to occur or prices will go up because we'll have to pay, Australians more, you see. The reality is that there are other options. There are other innovative ways to actually overcome these issues. The problem is that they're not interested. I'll give you another one that's really fundamental to our society, and that is because I'm studying law at the moment, I'm uniquely aware of it, and that is our justice system and the way we jail people, especially the Indigenous community, which occupy around 50% of the people who are actually incarcerated, which is a disgrace. And we won't go into the details there, but the point is, the research shows that incarceration creates more incarceration, creates more lawlessness. It doesn't actually rehabilitate. It doesn't reduce people getting into trouble or any of those issues. So rather than focusing on strategies which are being pioneered across the globe, they're focusing on the simple fix. The bottom line is we are to blame for allowing our politicians to get lazy, not just in justice, but in every field. We have an opportunity at this juncture, I strongly believe, which is the reason I've become part of the AFP, to make a change. All right. I think we really have an opportunity here to make some real headway. We are all committed, and I don't know if anyone's mentioned this, but just so that it's really clear, every candidate in the AFP signs a contract that says, with the AFP, that says we have to vote in alignment with the electorate. What other politician has ever done that or would do that? All right. I don't believe anyone would have the guts. But the point of this is that if the AFP gets in, it'll shake things up. It'll force every other party to then be responsible for the electorate once again, which is where it should have been to start with. All right. Just a quick one, a little bit of interest. I ran a poll on Twitter last week, and the question was, when was the last time you've actually heard from your local member? And the options were never, once since the last election, twice or more since the last election. 84% said that they had never heard from their local member. Now, my question to all of you is, this democracy that we supposedly live in is called a representative democracy. How the hell can they represent you if they don't even know who you are? Anyway, that's all from me for now. Thank you.
Well said, Peter. Now, just as we're wrapping up, we've got 3 minutes left. Would anyone like to share? David, you look like you're on the verge.
Hi, how you going?
Go for it.
Greetings all. How are you? My name's David Welsh. I'm actually a candidate for the seat of Monash for representing your party. Yeah, I'm actually just down at Phillip Island walking my dog on the beach at the moment, so I've just been
nice.
listening in, which is very nice. Yeah, and just having a nice walk. And I just want to thank all the other candidates for your knowledge and sharing that knowledge. It's certainly an eye opener. I probably just want to take this conversation to a different level, to a different place, and that would be that every Australian, every time a child is born on the land, everyone is inscribed as stock on a ledger through the Inscribed Stock Act and regulations that's been inscribed in 1911. So we've all been collateralized as a bankable instrument. So with this totalitarian, overarching world, global, these technocrats that have got their 2030 agendas and all these things, they're wanting to dismantle nations across the world and bring them into line so that we're all compliant to these. I suppose we've all heard the term New World Order and all those sorts of things. My knowledge and background is in canon law, trust law, equity, and that area. And where I bring some of my expertise and knowledge is that what I've discovered through many years of research and study is that we're all inscribed on a ledger through the birth certificate trust system, which is a bill, what they call a bill of the ladings document, and the registrar keeps us on this ledger as index stock. So there's what where all this money's coming from is the trilateral what's the word? The Vatican, with Washington, the bank, the London bankers, they've all got these agendas, and we are basically the gold bars in the treasury. So we've been basically put on this ledger as an asset, and that all of that value that we bring to the government. I think it was in 1933, I believe, that we were all, became citizens of a foreign vessel in dry dock, which is called the Australian government. And with that said, we're the Australian government, as it stands in Canberra, is a foreign vessel in dry dock. That's why they fly the flag. And when you notice when, like the Prime Minister of Australia, when he gets up to front the media and Australians, they cut the top of the flag off. Because what happens under a law of a flag is that when you're in contract under maritime law jurisdiction and law of the flag, you need to fly a flag straight up. And that flag, you need to identify what your volition is. And usually, the only thing I've seen is that on the top of those flags is a spire, and that means that you're at war with the people on that land. If you're at peace with the people, you have a ball on top of that flag stand. Which is very interesting. So they're in a contractual war with all of us, and we've been inscribed as stock. And so it's.
Although a lot of
I believe the funds are all. I think they're held in the. It's called the Consolidated Revenue Fund. So
Maybe put a link in
Yeah.
in the chat for any further reading. But that's interesting that a lot of
It's a
traditions,
different
though,
perspective.
a lot of people are unaware of the true meaning of these traditions, so they may not always be fully aware of the roots, the origins. But thank you so much for sharing, and thank you everyone for coming along today to our open forum. And this is exactly what it's about. It's about sharing our ideas and open debate, and we can furiously oppose ideas with each other, but all come out, friends, because that's what a democracy is about. It's about sharing and debating and then coming up with the best solution for everyone.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much to our Senate team and our federal team here, and for all of you who've come today. We're going to record this and share it if you don't mind, but please let us know, of course, if you prefer to not have your face shared, and we can put a little smiley emoticon on it instead or something. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.